Start recording, I think, and we'll get going. I'm sure some more people will roll in, but for everyone who's here, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. We have John and Dave, Body Solution, here right now. They put on a really amazing concert last night, so if you missed that, you should definitely go check it out. But I'm sure they're gonna have some cool stuff to share with us. So take it away and let me know if you need co-host privileges you don't have or anything like that. So
Okay, we'll do. Yeah, so as Adam said, I'm John Shaughnessy. I'm one third of Three Body Solution, along with Dave Bullard and Zach Pruitt. I'm not sure if Zach is going to be coming in; he might have to work, but I'll kind of do the best I can with speaking for him, I guess. So we are a free jazz improvisational collective, which is kind of something different than has normally been done in the Charlotte New Music Festival. I should probably back up a little bit. So I've been working with Elizabeth in the Charlotte New Music for probably 7 years. Is it somewhere in that area? 8 years? Yeah. So this is kind of the first time I've actually done an ensemble for the festival. And I kind of like, well, I kind of grew up listening to both jazz and a lot of new music and a lot of avant-garde music. So I kind of like that whole nexus between improvised music and kind of avant-garde elements. Um, I went to University of Buffalo, which at one time was one of the big new music hubs. Unfortunately, when I got there, a lot of the big players were gone, but definitely we kind of learned a lot about that kind of that period of music, and just different things like graphic scores and early computer composition, stuff like that. So I really got immersed in that, and I always kind of had the idea to do an ensemble that was free jazz, but also had more kind of compositional elements to it. So it wasn't just a half an hour of people just kind of playing whatever they wanted. So when the opportunity came to do Three Body Solution and to do a set of concerts with them, we kind of got some material together and started doing it, and then we wound up working with Charlotte Music Festival, which has been pretty cool. So if we did our concert last night, so if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's on the Charlotte New Music website. Just go find the stream. We also did a commission piece for Zachary, and that went really well too. So I'm gonna get into a little bit about kind of writing for free jazz and kind of writing for improvised ensembles, I would say. Um, First off, I'm not a big fan of the term jazz. I think it's kind of a limiting term. Um, People tend to have a lot of connotations, both kind of positive and negative, when you say the word jazz. But for me, it just means improvised music. It's how playing in the moment, playing extemporaneously, um, and really the question is, it's really just a matter of degree, like how much improvising versus written out music you're doing, and how much structure you're going to have as opposed to less structure. So that's kind of what I would say. What would you say about that, Dave?
Yeah, I would agree. Jazz is kind of misleading as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always struggle with. I've been doing it for a while in Charlotte too, in various guises, and we've always struggled with what to call it. There really isn't much of a good name that communicates what's actually going on to people that aren't musicians.
There's Zach Pruitt right there. Sweet.
Hey,
Um,
Zach.
Hello. Sorry I'm a little bit late.
that's okay. Are you
That is all
driving?
right.
No, I'm just in the car.
Do you have to go back to work soon, or you gonna hang for a bit?
I'm taking a break from work right now. So I have about maybe about 20 minutes or so,
Okay.
and then I'll have to hop off. So I hopped out here into the car just to check in, see what you guys are doing.
Okay. We were just talking about the word jazz and how it can be both good and bad. and just kind of talking about our
Yeah.
ensemble. Yeah. Oh, Zach froze up.
Most
Um,
people. Oh, I'm still frozen.
A little bit.
there you go.
Wait 1 second. Okay, so maybe I got a little bit now. So yeah, as far as jazz is concerned, or for me, I'm a jazz musician, but I'm not necessarily sure if like what this is jazz, which is an interesting thing. So I
Yeah.
definitely come from like a jazz background, and I consider myself a jazz musician, but not everything I play is jazz. I mean, even when I practice Bach and stuff like that, I mean, obviously that's not jazz, and I practice a lot of that stuff and listen to a lot of classical music. So, but most people, I believe, when they think of improvisation, probably the first thing that they think of is jazz, especially if they're American. So that's an interesting aspect of it. Whether or not it's negative or positive, I don't know. I think that really just has to do with what kind of social structure that the listener comes from, really. So, you know, good and bad. I've definitely had a little bit of both, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe loaded is a better term, or limiting, right? Rather than
Yeah.
positive or negative. It just sets up some presuppositions that people have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think positive and negative. Even the worst thing too, I think, is when it gets used as like a marketing term, either positive or negative. People will say, "Well, we don't want jazz in here," and usually what they mean by that is we don't want people playing like a million notes a minute or something like that, you know. But when you give them something that fits the room or fits the ambiance or whatever, or if you're playing something I think interesting, then people, oh, I don't like jazz, but I like this. I hear that all the time, constantly. So, um, anyway, I kind of would think about, yeah, like Zach said, we're definitely less of a traditional jazz quartet. Um, Really, what I think we are is more of like kind of improvisers, but individually improvising. It's like three separate voices in this group, I would say. I don't know what you guys think. It's less like there's a bass and a drum, and then we're playing underneath the guitar player. It's more like there's three separate voices improvising at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the reason I build my own drums is because I want them to sound less like drums, which I didn't really haven't achieved that yet anyway. But you know, I don't like drums, but that's what I play. So,
Yeah. Um, I kind of agree with that too. I'm trying not to kind of make my bass sound like a traditional bass, like the standard kind of four on the floor walking. I try to do some different ideas with it, and obviously, like I didn't do a lot of effects on the record, but I am into a lot of effects, which I'll get into in a little bit later. But Dave is too. Dave does a lot of electronic drum stuff. So, um, so if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about kind of writing for an improvised ensemble, whether it be us or whether it kind of be anybody else that you're working with. Um, I think the big consideration is number one, how much structure do you want to give the piece? And number two, how are you going to communicate what you want to have happen to the performers? I think two things are really, really important. Um, so the first thing, you can go all the way from writing something out completely, but making it sort of sound improvised, to just total free improvisation where people just walk up and start playing. Those are kind of the two spectrums I see, and everything else kind of falls in between that spectrum. And I can give some examples of stuff. For example, Zach's piece was pretty much written out for us. There were definite sections, and there were things that he wanted us to play and wanted us to hit. But then within that, there was improvisation occurring within that structure. So that's one way we could approach that. You guys want to say anything else about that?
It's just go ahead.
Oh.
Sorry. Go ahead, Zach. You got the limited time, man. You go.
Okay. Yeah, writing is a.
Oops.
Because the people that do it probably spend most of their time actually just practicing free improvisation, which is sounds kind of funny to say practice free improvisation, but you practice it with other people, and you sit wherever you're practicing, and try to give a solo performance, to whoever's in the room. Nobody most of the time, but then again, there is a lot of things that are written within this tradition as well, with like free jazz and avant-garde jazz, and then going into free improvisation too. A lot of those concepts do get written down. You have people like Steve Lacy, it comes to mind for me, who did a lot of experiments with what he called poly-free formats, where it could be a kind of a written out structure, kind of like a jazz tune, or a graphic score, and he kind of explored all of them. I don't know if he did any like completely through composed things, but yeah, the writing thing is very interesting in that way, and I really can be just taken from just about anywhere, and then the player itself is the voice that might bring it to life. That's kind of the way that I think about it. So yeah, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I guess kind of going along with that too. Like two examples that I like a lot that are kind of different from the same artist are Ornette Coleman. So he's got the science fiction record, which is kind of a large ensemble with strings, and a lot of that is improvised. And I think he's doing a lot of like string clusters on that with the harmonic idea, and really kind of doing some indeterminate stuff. And then the second one, which is really cool, is the Naked Lunch soundtrack that he did with Howard Shore, who is, if you don't know who Howard Shore is, a really well-known, respected arranger, composer in Los Angeles. And what Howard Shore did for him is basically created kind of a string quartet or chamber ensemble behind him, and then Ornette improvised saxophone on top of that. So those were kind of two approaches that I really like, where you can have an improvised collective, maybe a saxophone or whatever, a guitar, or you can have a group up front that's actually improvising, and then you can create written out score for whoever is performing with them. If you have an orchestra or a string quartet or any sort of chamber ensemble, you can also do that. A couple of years ago, I did something like that. There's a really good band called Ghost Trees, which is two guys in Charlotte who it's saxophone and drums, and they do a lot of like Albert Ayler, Ornette Coleman kind of free improv stuff. But they had they did their record, and they had a string quartet behind them, and I was part of the quartet for the premiere of the record. And what they gave us was a sheet that basically said Mixolydian scale, choose notes from the scale, and then they would give us a bunch of rhythms and a bunch of direction about how the music is supposed to go graphically. So there were four of us, I believe, four basses or three basses and a cello, I can't remember. So we all were able to pick notes out of that and then play behind them, kind of responding to them, but at the same time we had this direction. So, and it really worked out very, very cool, very well. Dave, got anything on that? Dave's gone. All right. I'm just trying to, I can't see Dave, so I don't know where he's at. But anyway, that's one thing you can do is kind of write for instruments that won't be improvising.
Actually, John, I do have something on that.
Okay.
Sorry, I lost the window. I'm trying to work.
That's
Deploying
okay.
Lambda functions to AWS while giving a presentation is fun. Anyway, but yeah, actually, for me, the only thing that has never worked in trying to mix notation, or let's say concrete music, specified music and improvisation has been time precision. That has been something I've never been able to overcome. And
What do you mean by that?
I mean, like coming out of free to nailing stuff as an ensemble. Like that was something
Oh,
that was difficult for us to do in Zach's piece, and like
right.
it's difficult. And this may be just a matter of skill, but it's difficult to be improvising and listening in a rhythmless context, anticipating a sort of unified hit. You know what I mean? That's really hard to do.
Mhm.
So I don't know what methods are out there for doing that, but that would be the one thing I would caution against in trying to nail that kind of precision is super hard.
Right. Um, I guess my thing, I kind of grew up listening to Mahavishnu Orchestra, where like none of the hits were ever where they were supposed to be. You listen to like Meeting of the Spirits or something like that, and every time they do a downbeat, it's like there's four different downbeats anyway. So it has that kind of loose feel to it. Um, I think you can do things, especially when you're playing together for a while. You can kind of know when somebody's going to wrap it up, or somebody can take the lead and kind of direct you into that section. You know what I mean? Whether it be like a drummer doing like a press roll or something like that. I think there are ways you can do it, but yeah, if you're looking for kind of like whipsaw precision on that stuff, yeah, that's definitely not, kind of not the focus there. You know, I think the other thing too, Zach, did you want to say something? Or is Zach frozen? I can't tell. Okay, he's looking over here.
Sure. Or maybe the other Zach wants to say.
No, it's you. I'm talking about you. Yeah,
Did I get present?
you're good. You keep
Okay.
freezing up.
So, okay. How about okay? How now? Is it okay?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Is it better?
Yeah.
Okay. What I would say as far as like a composer trying to get those kind of where like a unified texture, the things that I've witnessed that do the best in this kind of context is so people like Butch Morris and basically they're conductors that kind of guide the improviser. They are a really like shapes an ensemble in the moment usually with certain like hand signals and things like that. I've been a part of those things. I haven't done one in a while, but those types of performances I feel really do have a composition work that you don't get from just people hanging out in a room trying to interpret something. So if I was mainly a composer and I was trying to figure out something to do with improvisers, I'd probably do something like that, a conduction experiment, or maybe something like like Cobra, like John Zorn, the game piece type thing, because I feel like those end up having a real strong compositional arc that have very stark moments that have, unity to them. But yeah, I don't know, that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
So when you studied with Elliott Sharp, did you get to do any of like his more kind of through composed stuff, or did he talk about that stuff with you, like his string quartets or anything like that?
He did, yeah. I mean, he was interesting because he considers it all the same. It's all just direct transcription from your inner ear. That's what's his vibe. So a string quartet will, and of course it's not true to a certain extent, but inadvertently a string quartet will sound like one of his like solo guitar improvisations, and they do a lot of the times, so yeah, he really didn't distinguish between composition and improvisation, which is pretty cool. I don't know. For me, I think that that's not necessarily true, just because I find composition to be, the practicality of it is daunting because you have to get people to rehearse. And to me, that I just go straight into improvisation because of that. You know, I'm not that I'm not interested in chamber music or, you know, completely through composed music. I just, the practicality of actually composing, you know, notes on paper and then finding the money and the time and everybody to get, you know, get to it is just really, that's hard work. You know, that's hard clerical. You know, that's like day job stuff.
Yeah. Very much.
So yeah, that was
Agreed.
I kind of fell away from that a little bit, and then even though Elliot does do it and he goes after grants and he does all of that stuff, and you know, and we, you know, our lessons are pretty much always the same. We would improvise for a little bit, and then we would look at Beethoven string quartet, the whole like 3 and study with him. Almost every lesson is exactly the same. You know, which is pretty fun. I know those string quartets really well now.
So when you say
that's kind of my
so when you say his string quartet sounded improvised, what did he do to make that happen? Did he what kind of notation did he use, or did he use notation or any of that kind of stuff?
Some of it was completely, and but some of it is not to some of its graphic scores. But some of it is completely notated. And as far as like his, you know, and he always had this kind of where it's like your improvisation should sound like it's composed and your compositions should sound like they're improvised. That was kind of a thing that he always went for. And I'm trying to, you know, recall some of his more exactly notated stuff. I mean, to me, you know, it's just that there are unifying rhythms at times, and then at other times there are not. And then the pitch stuff, you know, was usually polytonal in nature, but he usually, you know, very much took advantage of the overtone series. And you know, those kinds of concepts. So with an instrument, so a lot of harmonics, a lot of extended technique type things, like that. And then and it varied, and you know, just like we were talking about before, it would vary from exactly notated, you know, material that was played by like the Kronos Quartet, or you know, something like the Soldier Quartet that would do just graphulate it in Photoshop. And he tried to make it look like specific, you know, kind of like phenomenon in Photoshop. So that, you know, the Soldier String Quartet wasn't really, you know, reading at all. You know, which is and then I think that's probably about it. You know, the thing that I always find interesting about that though is that, you know, to me it's very much conjecture. Like, what does an improvisation actually sound like? What does even a composition really sound like in itself, in a broad term? You know, that's such a, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if anyone can actually really answer that completely, you know? So that's, and that's, I guess that's very philosophical, but.
Right. I hear you. Yeah. So I guess to wrap that portion up, yeah, there's definitely like a continuum. So when you're thinking about how to approach writing for an improvisational ensemble, you do have a lot of options. It doesn't have to be all written out. It doesn't have to be all free improv. I guess the other thing I would say about that too is, as I've gotten older, as I've gotten older as a musician, I kind of like to meet people where they're at. I guess not only as a skill level of player, but just as where their experience lies. So, you know, if I'm going to write something for people that I know, for example, that are like rock or more blues oriented, you know, it's not going to be a big giant score, because I know that they're probably either not going to be able to read it, or they're going to get intimidated by it or something like that. Which is funny, because I actually have a thing in the back of my mind. I want to do like a very large electric guitar ensemble and basically just recruit people off of like Craigslist to come and play, kind of like one of those big Glenn Branca things. But I'm going to do the whole thing in tab. I'm gonna do the whole thing in tablature. Zach's laughing because I know, if I write this out in notes, 90% of the guys are gonna look at this and go, I don't know what to do with this. I can't see this, But if I use tablature, with the zeros and ones and the fret markers, I know I can get what I need out of him. So that's kind of how I look at it. Kind of, if you're writing for an ensemble and they're, like for example, they're more of an improvised player as opposed to a schooled musician, either write something that they can play or format it in a way that they can use it or make the best use out of it is kind of what I would say. You guys agree with that, Zach? Agree with that? Yeah, Zach's giving me the thumbs up. Dave? Dave's gone.
Oh, I was just voicing my agreement.
Okay. Yeah. So let me just throw up a couple things. These are kind of examples from my own repertoire. Just kind of examples of things of how I look at this stuff and how I approach it. Some of the stuff is stuff that we played last night, and it's gonna be on our new record. Some of the stuff is some older stuff that I've done. So let me just look what we got here. Boom. Let's see. All right. Trying to find this here. Hold on one second. Sorry. I don't want to share that. So the first thing I'm going to look at is kind of an example of something that I would write out. This is an actual kind of jazz tune where there's a head and some sort of chord structure, and then we go off into free improvisation from that. So let me just open this up for a second here. This is a tune called Below the Surface. This actually was on a record I did about 10 years ago, and let me just see where it's at here. Here we go. It's right here. Share. All right. So there it is. So this is Below the Surface. This is probably, honest to God, this is one of the hardest things I've ever written and the hardest things I've ever had to play. It's in 7/4, but the way it's syncopated makes it sound sort of like it's in 4/4. But anyway, I go through this whole head, jazz head, and then down here, this is all C7 sharp 9. This is where the free improvisation begins. It's basically swing, like a swing jazz feel. Now the thing with this too is that as I'm playing the improvisation, I'm using a lot of the melodic material that's come before to create the improvisation. So if you want a certain feel in the improvised section, write a melody or write a head that has that going on in it, and then a good improviser will use those notes and those intervals and the idea, the feel, to extend the improvisation. There's kind of a knock on jazz that it's all about like shredding scales or figuring out the right scale to go with the chord and just playing that. But a really good experienced improviser is going to play ideas and melodies as opposed to just shredding up and down notes. So just because this has a single chord on it doesn't mean you have to stay on that chord. That's really just the tonality that I'm thinking around, is the C7 sharp 9 tonality with the notes that would be contained in that. And then at some point in this, I returned to the head and played the head again. So this is an idea that you can do if you have a melody or you have an idea that you want I don't know what the word is. Extemporized. There we go. Extemporized is what I'm trying to say. But extemporize on that without having to write the whole thing out. You can do this. You can give this to improvising musicians and they'll know what to do with it. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel that I do that all the time, pretty much. That when I mean, even when I'm playing bebop, I try to do the same thing. Some people don't, you know. I mean, you could even take some like a classic like John Coltrane.
Right.
Doesn't actually do that a lot of the times. You know, he'll play the melody and then it's shred time. You know.
Yeah.
Which is you know.
Sorry, Zach, but even in his shredding, they're I'm thinking about Interstellar Space, right? Like even in that piece, like it kind of goes beyond, like the shredding just becomes a texture, you know, and like that's doable, you know, like even with the melody, you know, but like it's definitely kind of a different form of thing. But I know what you're saying, sir. I didn't mean to contradict you. I just wanted to bring up Interstellar Space.
One of the things I did. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I was going to say was that, you know, there are composers that feel too that have hard cuts in their compositions. So that's interesting, like the texture. But I mean, that's kind of like what Dave was just saying, is that it's, you know, that really is a textural thing almost when you have a hard cut in your composition from one section into the next. You know, so kind of like the opposite end of the coin of what you were talking about with the piece here. But because it's the opposite end, it's still very much.
Yeah. I just lost you. I think one thing I'd say about the Coltrane thing too, getting back to that, in the last Charlotte Music Festival, I did another little presentation about improvised music, and I kind of traced the whole development of now I'm drawing a complete blank. My favorite things. Thank you. My brain is not working. I did the whole development of my favorite things. So I started with the Julie Andrews musical version, and then went all the way to, you know, the last recordings live in Japan, with the 20-minute bass solo and you know, another 20 minutes of shredding. Was basically like a 40-minute song. One of the things I think, and Coltrane kept returning to that, you know, in his later period, he just kept returning and returning to that song and morphing and changing it. And I think, number one, I think he started to kind of turn it into almost like a raga, where he just was using the melody as like an Indian musician would, where you're playing the notes of the melody and then kind of going off on that interval structure. But then also he just was kind of using it, I think he just liked that kind of melancholy sound of that, because he never really went to the B section later on. He stopped going to the happy part, quote unquote, and just kept using the original, which is kind of like a dark melancholy sound. And I think, at least in my ears, he was kind of after that kind of keening wailing sound, and then that just was the springboard for the rest of the ensemble. So these things can go out as far as you want them, or well, this is the thing, if you're going to write this, it's going to go where the performer wants to go, not necessarily where you might want it to wind up. Which is the other thing to think about when you're doing this stuff. The other thing I was going to say about that is, I tend to be really bad about writing like through composed classical compositions anymore, because I tend to think to myself as I'm starting off a composition and kind of creating, you know, variations off the melody, variations off the idea. A lot of times what happens is I sit there and think, well, you know, I could just turn this into a jazz tune, and I know like 5 guys who would do this so much better than me. So I can just write a melody and have them improvise on it, and then we can call that a song, you know. That's just kind of an evolution I've gone through, because when I was younger, I wrote everything out. I wrote all the hits. If I was going to try to do a swing tune, I would write like double dotted eighth notes with 30-second notes, so that everybody would know that, you know, it's supposed to be a real behind the beat swing. And that was mostly because I didn't trust myself, and I didn't trust the performers that I was working with. As I got older and understood that you could trust people and hire people that were kind of more in line with what you wanted, then I kind of started to loosen the reins up, and now I'm really at a point where I barely write notes at all anymore. So, but anyway, that's the first thing. This is kind of like I call the first level. So let me go to another one here. So the next thing is just kind of writing fragments. So that's an actual melody that I've written out. Let me see here. Where's the other one? All right. So this is, where's the one? So this is a song that we did on our new record called the 3 Solution record, and this is marked untitled, but it's actually called Pandemic Blues now. So this is another example. This was actually something I wrote the night before we started recording. So I just basically showed up with this and had the other 2 guys play on it. And this, there's really no chord structure. It's roughly, I would say it's roughly G melodic minor, but really it doesn't revolve around the G so much. But I wasn't even really thinking that. I just had come up with this melody idea, and I brought it into the studio, and we tried it a few different ways. I think the first time we did it, I kind of did like a swing feel to it, and we tried it a little slower. We tried it at different tempos, and eventually what we wound up doing is I wound up just playing this really heavy G pedal on it, which kind of anchored the whole thing. If you listened to the concert last night, you heard us do this one. So, but again, as I'm playing through it though, I'm thinking it isn't just play this and then do whatever I want. I'm still really kind of basing everything around this melody and this idea. That's how I'm kind of thinking about this stuff. Dave, Zach, what are you guys thinking on this at all? I don't know if those guys are still here.
Oh, I would agree with that. For me, it was a very song-like melody.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of shapes itself into what 4-bar structure, I guess, kind of.
Yeah,
I would think. And then the way that I got the way I interpret it was just to let it hang within that 4-bar structure, and then just try to interact with you guys appropriately.
Yeah.
And I think that's about it. I mean, I tried to use melodic and harmonic material. Oh.
Yeah. So what were you thinking?
So I tried to use the same melodic and harmonic. Oh.
I said,
say that one more time.
I said, what were you thinking about when you were like kind of improvising on this, or were you thinking about it at all?
No, I do remember. I think I remember thinking, not necessarily while I was playing, but I remember thinking when because we tried it several times. So I was like, oh, it's like, kind of like the C7 suspended sound, and then I messed with like that suspension, and then the sharp 11 type thing that I would put on top of that, and just mess with those, and then also it kind of reminded me a lot of it's maybe something that Miles would do. So I messed with the third a lot, like like a blues player, major third, minor third, kind of blur the lines of the third of the melody. I remember thinking about that in between some of the takes.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, no, I don't really think I thought about much of that. I mean, rhythmically, I always just react to people really more so than think about it like very strictly. I mean, there were probably points when I was first learning how to play where I did think about it very strictly, but I heard you guys play something and then I played something I thought sounded good with it. That's pretty much
it. Yeah, I definitely, as we got going, it definitely started to sound more majory. It definitely started to sound more like a G7 than any sort of melodic minor thing. The other thing too is just for myself, I've been studying indie music off and on for the last probably 15 years. And I've really gotten into a thing where I tend to think more like I think about scales and modes, but I'm thinking about them with different pedal points underneath, or different locus of the notes. In other words, if I'm thinking this, for example, G melodic minor, I'm really thinking about it more being based around that D note or around the C note than I am around the G, which takes it out of that whole kind of cliche melodic minor sound that we think of in kind of Western classical music. So this was another one, and this just totally morphed in the studio into what we actually started playing live. So you can also do that. You don't have to come in with a definite idea and say I need it to be like this or it needs to sound like this. You can have an idea and say here's this melody I have, or here's this rhythmic idea I have. What can you guys do with this? That's totally fine and totally acceptable. And again, I think the thing is you kind of just need to be comfortable with the outcome. It may come out completely different than how you had it in your head or how you might have envisioned it. Just kind of need to be okay with that. I think, to me, in any sort of improvisation, it's a successful improvisation when things are just happening and they're not forced. In other words, if everybody's kind of playing as they feel and as they hear things, and the piece unfolds naturally, as opposed to, oh, we have to do this thing, and oh, I got to do this thing, and oh my God, I got to do this, or you guys didn't do this one feel that I wanted over here, or something like that. Then that kind of tends to constrict it a little bit. But I'm a huge fan of kind of this just kind of melodic sketch idea. I've done a whole bunch of these. This is a really good way to write for an improvised ensemble. All right, so the next thing I've got is kind of something I've been doing a lot more of just in general, and that's graphic scores. I've gotten myself less and less into writing out notes and more into just drawing pictures. This is another piece that we did on our let's get rid of this one here. This is another piece we did on our record, and this is another piece of mine called 8. I wrote this maybe about seven years ago or so. Let me see if I can share this here. Get it over. I can't get the piece to sit up and share the screen at the same time. Let me see here. All right. No, that's not gonna work. Sorry, I gotta resize this thing. Okay, here we go. So this is a piece called 8, and I did this basically in watercolor pencil, which is kind of something I like to fool around with. It's kind of a cool medium because I'm not a great artist, but watercolor pencil allows me to kind of draw precisely and then kind of wash the stuff into different shapes. So this is kind of one of the first things I did. I probably would redo this a little bit better if I was going to say put this in a print edition or something, but you get the basic idea. So the idea with this is on the bottom I've got this kind of running scale, and this is 0 to 8, and these are the minutes that we're going by. So the minutes are ticking by in kind of a linear fashion. I've got 3 sections to this, divided down vertically, and then each section has its own kind of feel to it. So there are different ways you can really think about this. I mean, well, you can think about it the same way you want, but the kind of the ways I would think with the circle, this could be, say, rain. This could be, different types of sounds, different rhythms that are going by. And then it's moving from kind of this one color up on top, yellow, to green. You can kind of think of key changes. You can think of tone changes, timbre changes, however you want to think. So this then moves down vertically, and then we go to the next panel, and we start at the top and go down vertically too. And this panel is more, it starts dark and then kind of lightens up. And again, you could think of this as a sky. You could think of this as, starting in kind of one like maybe a dark feel and going to a light feel, however you want to think about it. And then the third panel is pretty much monochromatic except for these two kind of wavy lines here. I tend to think of this more as like movement. So this is more, the yellow is more static and the green is more kind of movement. But again, there's a whole different range of options that you can think of. As Dave, does Zach take off? Dave, you got anything to say about that? Any ideas on that? Dave's not there either. Okay. So this is kind of one thing I experiment with. I do like the idea of this of having something to kind of start and end the piece, because one of the things you can get, especially with as you get closer to free improvisation, things tend to get longer and longer. If you notice, like a lot of total free improv tends to run in like the 15 to 20 minute range and more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can, if you're not doing it with kind of people that really kind of know what they're doing, it can kind of drift off into like hippie jam territory, which may or may not be what you want. So I try to look for things, even in a free improvisation context, to keep some sort of limit or some sort of defining thing to what I'm doing. So in this case, I used the clock. Now I've done it with the clock. I've done it actually timed out, and I've done it not timed out. And the interesting thing is that both of them tend to come out to be the same length of time. It usually hits around somewhere between like 7.5 and 8 minutes. Everybody's kind of just done at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. So I think we all have our kind of internal musician clock running on this, even if you don't have a straight ahead clock. This one here, let me just turn this off. So that kind of runs into something else I really like, which is, where's that one? Oh yeah. This is a project I want to do at some point, which is, go away you, large you, come on, no. Let me see, sorry. It's a little hard to see this, but this is the Cardew treatises. I don't know if anybody's familiar with those. If you're not familiar with Cardew, it's a composer named Cornelius Cardew, and he came out with this book called The Treatises, and it's 120 graphic score pieces of kind of varying textures and ideas. But the defining feature of each is that he has this staff, this kind of grand staff running underneath each one. So you can interpret these in a variety of different ways too. With the staff, again, this might imply a time element. This might imply some sort of accompaniment element. Who knows? The other things you can do is you can break up the graphic score. If I'm looking at it as an ensemble, I can break up this graphic score. Maybe, for example, drums take the bottom and the lead instrument takes the top part of this, or something like that. You could all play this all at once, left to right. You could play it top to bottom. And you can think about this in different ways. So, for example, you have music notes here, and you have something like representing a staff. You could try and use those as pitch ideas, as rhythmic ideas. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do in here, even though it's a total graphic score and there really is no indication of what you're supposed to play. There are a lot of things an improvising musician can do with this. Dave, you have any idea? Because I know you were a fan of this too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. My attention's been split. Sorry.
I hear you.
What was the thing you were saying immediately prior?
Oh, I was just talking about like how you can break up, say, a graphic score.
Yeah, the for me in particular, when John showed me this, I was really in love with the idea of the staff underneath and giving like just sort of thematic ideas. I think that's a really good solution, personally, and it keeps sort of the time keeps at least a feel for the time element that we're kind of familiar with from reading music, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I don't know, it's like an extended techniques version of musical notation, and I really appreciate it. I think it's pretty cool. I'm looking forward to doing this one with us.
So what do you think of the staff as being to you anyway?
Like I said, the staff for me would be kernels or seeds, right? And even sometimes shapes. But, you know, as a non-pitched percussionist, you know, I, at least in this context, I really just get more sort of broad strokes in terms of spectrum, you know, higher frequencies, lower frequencies,
Okay.
you know, and as a drummer, that stuff sort of implies functionality, you know, like, you know, the bass drum is almost always a period figuratively, and the symbols are notes and letters, you know what I mean? So like uh, it, it's interesting how much of like your sort of personal style as a drummer is influenced by stuff like that when I'm trying to, for instance, like we were talking before about themes you were improvising on in that 7/4 piece that you wrote, and how you would take bits of the melody and move it into your improvisation. There's a similar thing, but we obviously don't have melodies, you know, but because of the sort of real primal nature of drums, there are certain types of figures that just don't work, you know. Like trying to move a ride pattern down onto the bass drum, for instance, it just doesn't work for most people in terms of the way it comes across. Not to mention it being really hard to play. So I would see that more as, like I'm saying, sort of textural, tonal things, and it would get problematic, I think, if it was meant to be interpreted too concretely. But I guess seeds and kernels is the short answer.
Okay. Cool.
Is that helpful?
Oh yeah. Yeah, very much. Cool. Let me take that off. Let's see. So I have another graphic score that I actually wrote for a. Let's see here. Here we go. This is a piece that I specifically wrote for an event in Charlotte put on by a guy named Eric Mullis, who is kind of Charlotte's Renaissance man. He's a composer and modern dancer and drummer, does all sorts of different things. So this I wrote for electric bass and electronics. I did two things with this. So the first thing in the background is, again, the watercolor pencil. So I created these panels of color, and then I did the actual graphic part of this in not Pages. I did this in like Word, basically. So I went to the graphic section of Word and used the tools there to create this, and then the bottom part I did in Finale, and I just kind of put all these together in Word and then exported it. So that's something else you can do if you're trying to figure this out. Really, Finale is not. It's cool for graphics, and I've done some graphic scores in it, but it really doesn't work the best for doing this stuff. I get more mileage out of doing it in Word. So the idea behind this is that I have actual notes written down here, and these are more of like a tone collection and a range collection. So I'm really kind of thinking about like my highest and lowest range on this section of the piece, and then the other parts I'm kind of thinking about color. Yeah, definitely. Well, that was the first handwriting. I got a message. Handwriting graphic scores helps too. Yeah, that's kind of what I did with that piece 8. I kind of did all that by hand on a big piece of watercolor paper and printed it out. It definitely is an easier way to get where you want to be without having to try to figure out software. So I wanted something. I think for this one, I had done that one. I wanted something a little cleaner. So, and I don't know why I tend to like to work in threes. I like the triptych idea. I think it's something in my brain that just thinks about threes, the rule of threes in comedy or whatever. I don't know. So this is also a piece in threes. I should mention too, and I'm not saying this to blow my own horn or anything, but I'm a synesthete, so I tend to think of music as color anyway. So these colors to me, these mean kind of specific ideas and specific pitches, but at the same time, I wanted it to be open to everybody. So that's kind of what the notes down here are indicating. The notes down here are indicating that these are the pitches I'm really thinking about for this background color. And then the graphic part of it is really just really just kind of movement and action. I can think of different things, like for example, I could follow the circle, I could follow the trajectory of these circles, I could follow the trajectory of these lines. I could use the thickness of the lines to indicate volume or activity or some sort. So that's really kind of what my idea behind this piece was. I have sort of bar lines written here with the bass clef. So I can follow this in a variety of different ways, and I've never done it the same way twice. This also tends to be a little longer piece too, which for solo instrument is kind of interesting. I can clock this in usually around 20-25 minutes if I really try. So, but this is another idea. This is kind of where I've been going with a lot of stuff. Is three-body solution the answer to the three-body problem? Yes, because that's Dave Bullard came up with that. And actually, I just read somewhere that somebody has found the three-body solution.
Yeah, we had to propagate that meme for that solution to be found by someone else.
Yeah, actually, I seriously, I was reading something and somebody had come up with the solution to the three-body problem, but yeah, so we were ahead of our time, Dave.
Always avant-garde.
But anyways, this is kind of where I'm going with my own personal composition. Is I'm definitely going more to like this kind of graphic idea, and really just kind of letting the performers dictate things. And again, this has been a whole evolution for me. When I started as a young composer in my early 20s, late teens, everything was written out. I tried to account for every variable. I tried to, because I didn't know who I was going to get to play this thing, and I wanted to make sure that I was doing it quote unquote right. And as I've gotten older, I've learned more to kind of trust the players I'm working with and think more in terms of a big picture. What's the overall sound? What's the overall feel I want for this thing? What are the ideas I want communicated the most? Do I want a rhythm? What's the most important thing? Is there a melody that I think is important? Is there a rhythm that I think is important? Is there a texture I think is important? And those are the things I will write out. The other stuff I will leave more open to chance. So let me see here. Okay. So that's kind of an overview of kind of how I would kind of approach writing for an ensemble like us. Does anybody have any questions? Any other questions? I'm just waiting a sec to see if anything pops up.
Phil asked in the chat,
Mm-hmm.
When you write a score like this one, are you hearing it?
Good question. I'm hearing, yes, I'm hearing an idea, and I'm kind of in my own brain anyway. I'm kind of seeing an idea, meaning I'm seeing like a color or I'm seeing a texture. Almost, I kind of tend to think of music almost as like a painting. So when I'm listening to music, I'm really kind of seeing a painting, and when I'm writing, I'm kind of seeing a painting. So I have a general idea in my mind of what I want it to sound like. It's not just kind of random squiggles and lines put on there to make people's lives miserable. there is an idea behind that. But it's also the same thing with written music. When I'm writing out a piece in standard notation, I still have the same idea, the same concept in my head. It's just, I think written music is going to, for that particular application, is going to get me to where I want to be, as far as sound and as far as the outcome. I think really too, I'm more of a big picture thinker in terms of how I want my compositions to come out. I'm really like way less concerned about, you know, did this person play, you know, MP instead of MF in this one section, and I'm really more concerned about how did this thing sound, how did it feel, you know, did it communicate to the audience? Those are the things I think about really more than anything else.
Kind of as a, if I can jump in for a second,
Yeah.
kind of as a bit of a contrast for that, when I have composed or presented ideas to improvisational groups, the idea has been more about, the point has been more about to facilitate sort of the experience that we're all about to have, right? Because most, if I'll be honest, most of this performance for me is purely about in the moment. I used to have a philosophical problem to recording improvisations because I felt like that took away from what the purpose was. And of course, that was pretty selfish as an artist. But but in terms of like creating a piece, like always having in mind like the types of interactions that I want to facilitate, you know, because really sort of creating an on the fly collective orchestra or even an organism almost, but this the and so having the rules and the structure of the score set such that it can facilitate that interaction is super awesome. I mean, you can even play around with breaking it, but that's the kind of approach rather than hearing it, you know, to address the same sort of hearing it thing. I want to, you know, what is going to allow this ensemble to have the highest level of communication with each other is how I tend to think.
Okay, cool. Yeah, going back to your point about recording improvisation, I definitely understand that. I definitely understand that feeling. It almost seems a lot of times when you try to record something, you're trying to like capture lightning in a bottle or something. I don't know. I will say, I tend to look at jazz records and improvised music recordings as kind of a moment in time. It's almost like a snapshot, you know. You're taking a snapshot of what that band or that person was doing and feeling and thinking at that moment in time. That's kind of how I look at it. Having also said that, some of my most favorite records are kind of live jazz records or live, you know, concerts that came out much later with a lot of the same recorded material from the studio. Like, for example, I much prefer the Miles Davis Plug Nickel stuff to, say, the Prestige stuff, which he was basically just recording his live set in the studio. The Plug Nickel stuff is kind of the farthest extension of that group or that ensemble, and they're just playing in the moment, and they're playing, you know, to an audience. I think having an audience of some sort for improvised music is almost kind of essential, whether it's you know, playing on a stage or, you know, even doing a live stream. Just knowing that somebody else is out there kind of responding to it, to me, is a big thing. So let me see other questions here. Do you find ideas are often picked up by other musicians who look at graphic scores, or is there a layer of verbal explanation that comes along with the process? Ooh, good question. I think the first answer is yes. I think one of the things you find if you're an improvised musician of any sort is that you start getting this kind of mental telepathy between different players. So, for example, if I'm playing with people that I'm familiar with playing with, there will be a lot of times where we might play the same melodic or rhythmic idea without even thinking about it. Or the weirdest thing is that you all start to end at the same time. You're doing a free improvisation and everybody ends on the same note or on the same beat without talking about it, without looking at each other. There's just a certain kind of telepathy that starts to happen.
Yeah, there's a study I read last night. I'm about to link it into the chat that actually talks about that. And neuroscience is starting to see some really interesting results when putting people in fMRIs and having them collaborate. It's not just like brainwave pattern syncing, but they're actually talking about like functional cross neural connections, which is crazy.
Hmm.
But yeah, that I've experienced the same thing, and that's kind of the magic um, that I've been talking about and trying to create that. Um, yeah, I just linked to that an article about that study.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, sorry, we're starting to get in more into the esoteric side of why I do what I do, but I know it's a little
Oh no,
personal.
that's
So
great.
if you guys are interested in that stuff, we can talk about it. But
That's great.
it's uh, it's pretty strange stuff.
Because it
It's
is
super.
weird. It's a weird thing when you're in an ensemble and all of a sudden
Oh yeah,
everybody
it's
plays the
creepy
same thing
weird.
at
Like
once.
sometimes it's been weird enough to really make me sort of question,
Yeah.
like what are we actually? If we can be so precise by seemingly just being in the same room and with intent, like it's really amazing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I noticed too is if you're playing, it used to be like, for example, if you're playing with people that you know really well, you kind of start to get in that routine. I think you kind of subconsciously know what they're going to do at certain points or how their feel is going to be. What's
Yeah,
really crazy is when you start playing with people that you never played with before and it
yeah,
happens, you
yeah.
know?
That's I mean I we're not quite to that level, but the first time the three of us played together,
Hmm.
like we talk about how we just clicked, right?
Hmm.
I feel like that's an expression of that, you know.
Yeah.
And it seems to not have very much to do with anything other than like a sort of a mental and emotional approach to the music you're making. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It isn't like you were saying before. You don't really even really think about people's skill levels as much as you're just thinking about where they're at,
Yeah.
because the thing that people have is almost extra musical in terms of like what allows them to improvise well.
Yeah. And you're saying about skill level, just made me think of several years ago. I had this student who was a really exceptional player, and he didn't have a lot of chops like what we would think of as technical ability, but he could just hear anything, and I would actually bring him to gigs and let him play, and he would play. He knew what he was doing, without having any knowledge of what the notes were or scales or anything. He could just kind of hear things and play them.
I've got a friend like that. He's got a little like training Wurlitzer piano from elementary school, um, uh, and he is not trained at all. But him and I used to do duets, just drums and him on that thing, and it was just fantastic.
Hmm.
Um, and when he finally got his first computer that could actually run a DAW, he started making incredible music. And so it was
Hmm.
interesting to see like what somebody that isn't steeped in the Western tradition, was able to do once they were given tools that let them be musically expressive without having training. It was really
Yeah.
really neat.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah,
I think too, it's more how I get better as a player. I think that's the one thing with this, with kind of writing for in this kind of style. You're really you're really writing to a more individualized player. If you have say Bach, for example, you can interpret a Bach score from 400 years ago today, and it's materially going to sound like what it sounded like back then. We know performance practice. We know everybody kind of knows this. It kind of comes out of the same school and kind of knows what the expectations of that style are. Um, with this kind of music, it's very personal music. You can take your composition to five different people, five different ensembles, and you're going to get five completely different interpretations. In fact, kind of one of my plans for that 8 score that I showed you guys is I would like to do that score with like 10 different ensembles and make a record of just playing that with different people. I think that it would be like a totally different and new thing for me. So I think I could get some really cool ideas with that. Um, so that's something you want to think about is who is your the ensemble you're writing for. Who are they? What what do they sound like? What's their typical approach to playing? Is it very frenetic? Is it more atmospheric? Those are going to be the kind of things that are going to determine what your composition is eventually going to sound like. Um, as far as the level of verbal explanation, again, you can set parameters however you want. for example, you could say, well, I want the bass to play something like this, or I want the drums to do something like this. You can set that. I did a thing once. This was kind of a crazy thing. I did a thing with 4 bass players and a trumpet. So it was 4 upright basses, and a trumpet. And the trumpet player was the guy who wrote all the music for this. He sort of wrote, and we would do things like, for example, play anything on your bass except the strings. If you touch your strings, you're out. It was like a little musical game. So how long could you make sounds on your bass, before you had to go and touch the strings? It was actually a lot harder than we kind of thought it was. So you can definitely do stuff like that. Let's see. Sun Ra recorded everything. Yes, he did. There's a lot of really good recorded Sun Ra. I'm a huge fan. I was a huge fan when everybody thought he was a weirdo. So
I still think he's weird, and I'm a huge fan.
Yeah. I can't believe Marshall Allen is still alive and leading that band at like 96. That's crazy.
That is nuts.
Let me see here. Anything else? Yeah, 96. I got it. Cool. Let me just, if you have any other questions on kind of the stuff I just went over, just hit me up in the chat here. I think I'm just going to close with, I had a bunch of questions last night about my rig, my FX rig that I was using on my bass. So I'm just going to go through that really quick. And let's see here, where is that? All right. I've been really getting into guitar synthesis for a very, very long time. I've always kind of been obsessed with it. I grew up in the 70s when guitar synthesizers were just starting to become a thing, and they were like the size of a small building. So it's kind of been an obsession of mine for a long time. And about 20 years ago, I started doing a trio in Charlotte, and I started really using a guitar synthesizer as almost like an extra player. So for example, I could like put an organ patch on there and comp organ with myself, and then play solos over the organ with myself. So it's just kind of something I'm getting into. I've recently started doing it with upright. It was kind of tricky in the earlier days of kind of electrified string instruments. I'll get into that in a second. Let me just show you what I got going on here. That's not much. Okay. All right. So, and this is a good thing if you're thinking about either writing for an ensemble with electronics, or putting together an electronics rig yourself. This would be some good information for you. So here's what I got. All right, so this is my basic pedal board setup for the 3-body solution stuff. I'm going to go kind of lower right, and then kind of work my way around. So the first thing I've got is called the MIDI mouse. This is just a MIDI patch changer, and it's hooked into the Boss SY300, which is directly above it. The cool thing with this is, number one, I don't have to put the wear and tear on the switches on the actual unit. I can kind of step on these things, and they're a lot wider spaced apart. If you have big feet like me, it's a lot easier to get to them. So that's the first thing. And also the really cool thing about the MIDI mouse is that I can actually change patches on it without actually changing patches on the unit. So for example, if I want to scroll 10 patches up to get something, I'm not going to scroll through a whole bunch of really noisy sounds to get there. I can just kind of scroll as I go, and then hit the button, and then I'm there. So that's connected via MIDI to this SY300. The SY300 is a newer synthesizer that Roland came out with maybe about 3 or 4 years ago. The cool thing with this one is that it doesn't use any special cables. It doesn't use any special pickups. It's just, you can just kind of plug and play. One of the things with guitar synthesis that's always been hard is figuring out the tracking. In other words, a lot of these will use a special pickup that's divided, and then they'll take the pickup and then try to process it via MIDI, and it creates a whole bunch of latency issues. It creates a whole bunch of tracking issues. This really is more of like a gigantic analog synthesizer is really what they did here, and your guitar instrument is more of like a just like a tone, like another waveform that's being processed. So this is kind of a cool idea. Like if you actually get into this, it actually has the whole attack, sustain, decay, and release parameters that a analog synthesizer would have. It's really complicated as far as programming it, but there are some really cool patches in there, some really cool stock patches that I can use. So I've been using this with the bow, which has worked out fantastically well. I'm going to back up just a second, and this is really important. Again, if you're a string player, this is something really, really important. Yes, pickup and preamp. So what I'm using just a stock Paizo pickup. It's the David Gage Realist is the one I'm using on my bass. And the problem with that is that pickup is a real, I'm trying to remember which is which, it's a real high impedance pickup. The signal coming out of it is not very strong, and it tends to be noisy. So what you want to do with that is you want to send that into some sort of preamp that will take that Paizo signal and bring it up enough so that it can feed these other instruments. One of the big things I see with people that try to attach a pickup to a violin or a viola or a cello, they'll take the pickup and then the cord, and they'll try to plug it in the mixer, and then you'll start getting this howling feedback, and nobody knows what to do, and it's hard to control. And the reason for that is because the mixer is really trying hard to amplify this really weak signal. You need something in between it. You need some sort of preamp or preamplifier. There are a whole variety of preamps on the market that will work for amplifying Paizo pickups and strings. Some of them sound really good, some of them sound really terrible. You just have to kind of use the process of elimination. For our recording, I use my API transformer, which I really, really love. I'm a huge fan of API products in general. Most of my recording studio is API. I can't say enough about that company and the stuff they do. I mean, they're like legendary. They're like a legendary company for recording stuff. So I use an API preamp that makes the signal plenty hot and then feeds into the input of the SY300. So from there, I'm heading out to this Ditto X4 looper. Looping something I've gotten into recently too. This has two separate loops on it. You don't need to get all that fancy. This way I can for example, set up a drone, or I can set up a pad of some sort on the SY300 and then create a loop with it and then play on top of it. It's just kind of a fun thing you can do. There are, again, tons of different loopers on the market. This is just the one I kind of like the best. I think the Ditto sounds the best of all the like sub $500 ones. The Boomerang sounds great. Some of the better electro-harmonic stuff sounds great, but they're all tend to be really kind of in the $400, $500, $600 range. If you're not that super serious about looping, you can go down lower. I don't like the Roland stuff. I think it sounds too grainy. I think the Ditto sounds the best of a lot of the ones I've heard, so that's why I use it. I'm coming out of the Ditto in stereo, and I'm going into this, it's called a platform. This is a compressor, and this is probably the most important thing for any sort of electronic rig. Learn how to use compression. Buy a compressor and put it at the end of your signal chain. So what I did here is I have a compressor that has a kind of a slower attack on it, but a long release. And what that does is it allows it to sound natural. Like if I hit a note, if I pluck a note, you're going to hear the full pluck. It's not going to get just sucked out. But what it does is it really keeps your filter effects, which are things like wah, wah, any sort of sweeps, any sort of sub bass, anything like that you're putting on there. it keeps it from like blowing up the system. Because what can happen a lot of times is you're playing and you hit a patch. Let's say you want to like put like a sub bass on there, and all of a sudden, you know, the speakers are vibrating and the sound man's freaking out at you. So the way to do that, the way to keep that from happening, is put a compressor on the end and then set it to kind of a moderate level, with a lot of release, so that, you know, any effects are going to get caught and brought down. What it basically is it's a volume control. It's a really fast automatic volume control for things. So it's going to do the turn down job for you. I can't really say enough about that. Put a compressor at the end of your chain, learn how to use it, learn how to work it, and you're going to get much better sound and much better results from effects. And then the last thing I have here, this is just a DoD volume pedal. This is just kind of my fail safe. It's great for if I'm playing upright and I either want to like mute something really quick or just turn it off, say for a break, so it doesn't feedback. I can use that, and also I can control the volume level. If I get a patch that's really hot, I can kind of modulate the volume level between that and what I was doing before. So it's just like an extra fail safe at the end of the compressor. So this one's not terribly complex, but that's the basic. That was the basic thing I used for the concert last night. Any question on that? Radio stuff's also, yeah, radio stuff's great. I'm also a big fan of Radial. Radial DIs are real nice and clean. If I was going to buy another DI, I would buy a Radial. Let's see. Okay, so that's that. Anybody have any questions? Anything I covered? I think that's about everything I have to talk about today. Dave, you want to add anything else?
Not that I can think of.
I just droned on about my effects rig forever. It's too bad you can't. You don't have a video. You could show them your Bode Octobands there.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I can't really think of anything to help these guys write that we haven't already covered.
Okay.
Except for be patient with drummers. Not all of us. I mean, I have a little bit of training in classical composition. That's what I did out of college, but there aren't many of us that have that. So be nice to them.
Yeah. I would say two things I noticed about drummers a lot, especially in jazz and improvised music. Number one, you can talk to them in terms of sections, you know, as opposed to play these notes. Be like, okay, for 24 bars you're going to play a swing beat, or for this part you're going to do an atmospheric for, you know, 48 bars or something. And then I need you to do this little pickup to get into this next section, and they'll actually know what you're talking about. So you don't have to write super specifically for drums unless you want to. The other thing I noticed with drums is that most really good drummers are just extraordinary listeners. They really have a grasp of the piece in a way that the rest of us don't. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. When you're playing drums, you know, as Dave said, a lot of times drummers don't read, but they really know how to listen. And they will listen to things like melodies. They will listen to sections. They will listen to dynamics. Not only because they're trying to figure out what's going on, but also because they tend to need to be able to lead. Most of the time in an ensemble, we are following the drummer. So, what I would say what I was going to say about that is a lot of times, like for example, when I do big band, if I'm playing with a big band drummer, like they don't want a drum chart, they want the first trumpet chart. They want the lead chart, so that they can see what all the hits are. They can see where the melody is. They want to play to that melody, which is kind of cool. You know, very rarely do they get an actual drum part that says, okay, play these hits here, play these hits here. Most of the time they're doing what we call setting up hits. So for example, if there's a rhythm that's going on, they're going to set that rhythm up with another rhythmic figure to let the horns know that this thing is coming up. So if you're writing for drums in a jazz ensemble or like an improvised ensemble, that's another consideration for you. Any other things you want to add with that, Dave, or did I do a good job?
You did a pretty good job. Also, most of us aren't very good at being quiet. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah, true. Um, can you talk about the seeming fear of improvisation that a lot of legit players and composers have? Okay, yeah. Um, I think the fear of improvisation really is just not a fear of listening, but just not being accustomed to having to listen. I think a lot of it is a lot of it, and that's really just a skill that can be trained like any other skill. Like reading music or learning your scales or any of that stuff. Just learning to listen and play in the moment. Um, and the
yeah.
weird thing is, it happens.
Go
Sorry.
ahead, John. Sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Oh, the weird thing is, it also happens to actual jazz musicians too. I mean, a lot of times when somebody who's a quote unquote bebop musician, or a straight ahead musician, has to play a modal score, or has to improvise freely, or has to play from a graphic score, they get freaked out too. Well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with this. It's just D minor. I don't know what to play on D minor. Because in jazz you really kind of get trained in a lot of these patterns. We call them kind of enclosures or extensions or licks, however you want to talk about it. So a lot of times when you're practicing these things, you tend to get caught in that kind of trap of you're playing kind of pre-programmed lines and then connecting them as you go through chords. And when you don't have that, when you have to play ideas, it definitely, for some people, it can be a little intimidating. It does take practice. Strangely enough, it does take practice to play free.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I addressed it a little bit last night, but I've got a friend who's a fantastic piano player, but she's terrible at improv by her own admission. And working on it with her, we just kind of discovered that it's really about the fact that she is not used to playing what she hears. She's used to playing
Mm-hmm.
what she reads, and so
Mm-hmm.
she has a whole new skill set to develop where
Yeah.
and so for her, a lot of times it feels like she's playing without a net, and in a real way she is. And yeah, the practicing to play free is very true, and it's something that can be done um, without sitting behind the instrument as well, and just in terms of like just listening to what's going on around you in the world as if it were an improvised piece of music, and listening to, I don't know what I tend to do that, but and I have my part of it going on in my head, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just but the practicing listening and practicing actually moving your body under moving your body intentionally while listening to what someone else is saying, basically. And that's a skill that can be developed outside of the practice room, but it does take a lot of work.
Right. One of the things I tell my students a lot about when I'm introducing them to improvisation is I kind of liken it to talking. So, I've been talking here for an hour and a half now. I came in here with a rough outline of what I wanted to talk about. Basically, just hit some points, but I really had no idea what I was going to say. I didn't write out a speech or anything like that. I don't even know what I'm going to say. I don't know what the next sentence I'm going to say is going to be, but I have an idea of how I want to get from A to B. I spent enough time in school doing spelling and grammar, so I have a grasp of, or at least a reasonable grasp of the English language, I think. So I can use those elements to construct ideas and thoughts without actually having them pre-programmed and written out for me. I've never been good at that. I've never ever been good at like reading a script or any of that kind of stuff. I'm terrible at it. If you don't mind me telling a little story. So when I was in senior year of high school, we had to do this big presentation for my social studies class, and it was like half of our grade, and you had to do this whole thing where you had to get up in front of class and you had to do this presentation with audio visuals, and then you had to answer a question from everybody in class, which was like 30 people in this class. So me being me, I completely forgot about the assignment until the teacher told me that I was going to do it that day. It was like, okay, you're up today, you know. I luckily enough had seen him early in the morning before class, so I went up to the library. I knew a lot about space and space travel and all this stuff, so I went to the library, got some encyclopedias out about space, and basically just showed up to class and talked for half an hour on space. And then people would ask me questions about the Apollo mission, and I would just tell them what I knew from the Apollo mission. I had no notes. I had no flashcards. Everybody else that came up was like looking at their flashcards every 2 seconds. I'm just sitting there talking. And I did really well. I got an A. I think the teacher knew that I didn't do anything, but at the same time, you know, I was able to just pull out that improvisation idea. I mean, that's my career as an improviser. I show up and I don't know what I'm going to do, and I play.
That's funny. I've got a similar anecdote. I won't go into it in as much detail, but I was a campaign manager in 7th grade for somebody's class president campaign, and I forgot the day they were supposed to have the debates, and I was supposed to give a speech. So I just got up in front of the school and improvised a speech, and did pretty well. So maybe there's something kind of inherent about it.
I think so. There was a great jazz drummer in Charlotte named Jim Lackey, and Jim had played with a lot of really great people. But every time you'd play with him, he'd just show up. You call him for a gig, he'd show up, set up his drums, and then he'd do this. He'd be like, bang, bang. Okay, so what are we doing? You know, never thought to ask what the gig was. Never thought to ask, is there music on this gig? Are we reading? Are we doing? What do we? Didn't care. Didn't matter to him because it was. Yeah, it would all work. It would all be good, and he would just listen his way through everything. You know. I guess that's the long explanation of the fear of improvisation. Is really just a fear of listening, I think, and training yourself to listen and training yourself to respond, you know, to what other people are doing, the same way as if you were having a conversation at a party. That's exactly how I look at it at an improvised ensemble. It's 3 people having a conversation, you know. And when you start to get to the thing where you're forcing ideas on top, that's in free playing, that's kind of the worst thing you can do. If you say to yourself, well, I have an idea that I want to do this and I want it to sound like this, and you start pushing that, then already it's going to sound bad because you're already messing up that conversation. At least that's my feeling on it.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, TBS released the album on Hard Media. We've been talking about it. We were talking about doing it on LP. Zach actually had talked about contacting a cassette-only company that he knows, which for free jazz and improvised and avant-garde music, cassettes have become the kind of medium of choice lately, which is interesting. So I just finished mastering the record. I think we're going to add Zach McDonald's piece to the record, so I probably would take about a week or so to mix that. And then we'll kind of consider our options. But yeah, I would definitely like to release it on Hard Media.
That'll be cool.
Yeah. LP production is just as a whole other side. I love records. I am a huge record fan. If you can scroll over there, you can see my record collection over there. I've been collecting records since I was a kid, and I would love to do it on LP. The costs associated with it now are really tough. Like, you really need to have a lot of pre-orders in order for it to go off, I think. Or you need to be already in a very successful band that you know you're going to get 1,000 people to buy your record before you do it. So unfortunately, it just takes a lot to make a record, you know. And I completely understand the cost involved in it because I know what it takes. You need to get a silver master printed. You need to actually get it mastered. You need to get the lacquer cut. You need to get a silver master. You need all this stuff, test presses, all that thing. It takes a lot, and it's worth it. But you know, if you're gonna buy 1,000 records and hope that people are gonna buy them, they might be sitting in your basement for a while. So I don't know. We're talking about it right now. Anybody else have any other questions? All right. I think I've kind of said everything I need to say. if anybody thinks of anything, you can just either hit up Elizabeth or you can message me directly. Dave, you got anything else to say in conclusion?
Not really. Other than if you want us to play something, write us something.
Yes. Yeah, we're definitely accepting commissions even outside of the festival. So just let us know. Great. Well, thanks everybody.
Yeah, sweet. Thank you all. Great stuff. I think our next session is at 7, which it looks
7
like
o'clock.
you're actually hosting. So
I am hosting. Yeah.
yeah, y'all tune in for that if you want. Until then, thank you again, and we'll see you all later.
Thanks.